Welcome to Tabletop Tommies. In this video I'm going to talk you through the 1250 point Soviet army that I built and painted in only a month for the Welsh Nationals. It's 22 order dice, and starting at the top I've got two regular second lieutenants. I modelled these guys with their arms pointing in the air so that I could easily find them on the battlefield and differentiate them from my NCOs. I also painted a little red band around their caps, which I didn't do for the NCOs, again just to differentiate them from them, in case in the fog of battle I confused them. Now, the reason I took them regular is I was planning to use them inside the trucks, which very well might be in reserve if there's a prep bombardment, or an outflank if I'm really trying to push, and I've put them in there to bolster the morale of the truck. Now, because they're getting really close to the front, they might be doing some shooting with their SMGs, in which case I don't really want the -1 to hit because they're inexperienced, and also because they're getting close to the front, there's a good chance that truck gets destroyed before they get out, and so a 4+ to wound rather than a 3+ just gives them that little bit extra survivability. Jumping into the troops, I've got the free inexperienced squad with AT grenades. Nothing really fancy about these boys. They are green, which is always nice to have. I didn't take a flag because I didn't realise that was a possibility, as I'm new to Soviets. And generally what I was using them for was either just to hold an objective, to act as a bit of a meat shield to give the boys behind cover, or for stealing the secondary. Basically I was using them for anything that wasn't mission critical or anywhere where they'd need to be very survivable. Now, into the meat of the army, I took 6 of the mounted recon squads from Fortress Budapest. These boys have the special rule where you can leave one behind when they dismount. I actually didn't take them for that special rule because the trucks they were in only had one MMG, and the whole point of leaving a man behind is to man a second gun in the transport. And so the reason that I actually took them was because it was a source of regular engineers in the Soviet force, which meant that for 70 points I could have 5 men and a flamethrower. I did pay an extra 3 points to give them an SMG each, and that was partly because I had a few points left over, partly because if the flamethrower misses it gives you that one extra shot that hopefully you'll take an extra wound, and finally, just in case there is that counter charge, every now and then that one tough fighter does swing the combat and give you the win, whereas previously you would have either drawn or lost. Now finally, in the infantry slots, I took 2 of the scout squads. The scout squads were fully loaded with SMGs. I was either putting them right in the middle of the table to act as a distraction for my opponent to shoot at so the rest of my force could advance, or I was using them to mislead my opponent into which way I was going by just throwing them onto a flank on their own that I had no intention of going down, and that meant that my opponent would commit some of their force to that flank, which meant that the bulk of my force had less of the opponent to fight against. Now, it was 170 points I was spending on this sort of distraction tactic, and I think there's probably better ways I could have spent those points, perhaps on some howitzers or heavy mortars, but I'll talk through my overall thoughts at the end of the video. Now, to transport all these flamethrowers and officers, I took 3 trucks. Of my 3 trucks here, one of them was previously captured by my German recce platoon, and the Soviets have just recently captured it back for the Welsh Nationals. Another one was built especially for it from a Rubicon kit, and the third one was 3D printed. It was actually a failed Tokarev print. I actually took these regular because I wasn't really planning to deploy them on the table at any point, which meant that they'd either be in reserve or outflank, and so testing on an 8 instead of a 7 can often make a huge difference to their chances of arriving. Now, with the officer on board, 2 of them were testing at a 9, which really almost guaranteed they'd arrive. But of course I was still caught out when I was playing Luke with one of the trucks refusing to arrive for 2 or 3 turns. But it is a game of dice and these things do happen, and I would still take them regular in future, again because you're shooting that MMG and you really don't want the extra -1 for that. And using your truck as a bit of an MMG pillbox once the boys are dismounted is a great use for them, as opposed to paying about 100 and odd points for 3 units that basically just run away after they've delivered their payload. Now, onto the fun units in the army. In my infantry support slots, I had 6 of the Ampulamets. I made a video how I built these, but effectively it's a 3D printed gun, a prone model from the Winter Infantry plastic box set from Warlord, and the 2 loaders are from the Warlord Winter support box. Originally the loaders are intended for the light mortar and the sniper, but I think they make great additions to the Ampulamet model. Finally, in the force, I had 2 Tokarevs. The Tokarevs were really intimidating. Putting 20 dice down range is really intimidating against these squishy infantry squads. Now, it is fairly easy to counter by just hiding behind walls and things, but having those 4 machine guns really does create areas of denial where your opponent's infantry really don't want to go. Now, I'm probably not the best player tactically with the Tokarevs, because a lot of the time I was just throwing them away because they're such a cheap order dice and so mobile. I would quite often use them to either block a road or to just really push forward and put pressure on the enemy, which allowed the rest of my force a little bit of free movement around the table. Both my Tokarevs were 3D printed. Now, overall, I really enjoyed the way the force played. It was very fast, very mobile. The thing that it really lacked was long-ranged, high explosive. Effectively, I had no way to force the opponent to come towards me or to even just move. It was very easy for them to castle up and just sort of stand their ground and go into ambush for the flamethrowers coming in. And so going forward, I think the move would be to swap out the scouts, let's say, for either howitzers or heavy mortars, perhaps even swap the Tokarevs for Katyusha if I was going down a very competitive route. However, as V3 is just on the horizon, I don't think this will become my primary competitive force over the next few months. I think this is going to remain a thematic force. It's already very similar in build and style to my Recce Germans for Fortress Budapest. I think to make it a little bit more flavoursome and a little bit less powerful, I'll probably dial back the flamethrowers, add some more sniper rifles, which really fits that urban rubble theme. But I'll keep it very mobile and very lightweight without any armour if it's going to remain a Recce platoon. Now, I can also use this force for later war, maybe it's the Siege of Berlin. For that one, I'm thinking about adding some heavy armour, something like a KV 1 or 2, maybe it's even an IS, perhaps even an IS-3 for a bit of a sort of a what if they'd managed to get them to Berlin situation. I think that'll be a lot of fun, but obviously not very competitive if I'm spending that many points on a single tank. But stay tuned for future updates on my Soviets and potentially even a battle report. Ta-ta for now.